We have today Khaled. Actually, this is really, I don't really know what to say. Like, you made all of this happen. You know, like, I don't even know how to introduce you. So, like, I'm just gonna call you the big boss, if that's okay.
Well, just consider me the temporary replacement for Alex until he's back. We honestly miss him.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be in Dubai, but due to the current situation, he didn't make it. And we'll wait for him to come back.
Yeah. Well, until then, we're happy to have you and get your very unique perspectives on the industry. I think today we decided to break the episode into 3 different segments. So we're going to talk about specifically independent watchmakers in the 1990s all the way to 2000, and then the year 2000 to, let's say, 2020, COVID. And then let's talk about how everything kind of changed very drastically in the 2020s. Because in my opinion, it feels to me that if we were to differentiate the 2000s to the 2010s, in terms of independent watchmaking, I don't think that there was a lot different. Like, whatever was obscure then was still obscure later. Whatever was on discount then was still on discount later. The brands then, you know, are not very different from the brands of the 2010s. Like, if you were prominent in the 2000s, you were probably prominent in the 2010s as well. I don't remember a lot of new independent watchmakers that popped up in the 2010s, and this is just me, like, off the top of my head saying it. So yeah, does anybody want to, like, throw some thoughts?
I think that was still the 2010s was a very risky time for people that were maybe thinking of going independent, because there wasn't a lot of traffic. And they could see that, you know, you really had to, there was a lot of commitment, and you're either going to make it and struggle or not be able to go back. So it was a crucial time, slow, but as you said, I personally don't recall any big moments back then. Maybe Khaled, your memory.
I mean, okay, well, let's go back to the 1990s.
Let's go to the 90s.
And in the 1990s was extremely different. I mean, I would say the most popular or famous independent brand, which is Philippe Dufour. And I remember in the 1990s, barely anyone knew him. And this is from someone who goes to Baselworld, who works in the media. The amount of people that knew Philippe Dufour was so numbered. People just didn't know him. He became famous in 2000s. That's when his Simplicity watch came out. That's when the popularity came out. That's when social media came out. What a lot of people don't realize, in the 1990s, how do independent brands get their name out? There was no way to get it out. There was barely an internet. There was only pro sites, very limited number of places. When we're talking about, say, print media, which was prevalent during that time, it was very different. You would go to a brand in Baselworld. You would go to visit. They would give you a catalog, and they would give you a CD inside it. There was no USB. So you would take the CD, you have to carry it with you all back, and you would carry the catalog with it, because sometimes the pictures are not available on the CD. So you take the catalog so you can scan the images.
Didn't they have projector slides too? Because I have something from the early 2000s with the projector slide.
Yes. And the projector slide is to scan it.
Yeah.
Yes. And I can imagine when I was going to Baselworld, we would come with 2 suitcases, 30 kg each, packed with press kits. There was no USBs at that time. So you can imagine that to get the information out was so hard. An independent brand that was not in Baselworld during that time, it was just impossible for them. It was such a costly endeavor, because you have to pay for Baselworld, you need to get all the catalogs done, you need to print everything. It was not so easy as now, where you can send it by email, you can use social media. The cost of entry is much lower than at that time.
I noticed you mentioned the phrase independent brand, and probably to shed light on that, I don't think in the 90s there were any independent brands more so than independent artisans.
True.
Because as you said, there was no sense of publicity. I wasn't active at that time, but just from my research, I can probably...
He was 5 years old.
Depending on when in the 90s.
1997.
For the independent artisans back then, a lot of them also had an issue, which was a lot of their business and their name making was behind the scenes. These bigger, larger brands, Vacherons, Piaget's, these guys that were back then hot and making stuff, they were thriving off of the creativity of these artisans who, like Vincent Calorez, like François Paul Journe, like...
You had to mention Journe, didn't you?
I mean, I had to, but because I can think of what they were making. Like you have even Anderson. You have these guys were working behind the scenes, developing. That was the trend. You were developing stuff for larger brands, and it was all NDA. You couldn't say what you were doing and for whom. Which is how it started, and moving forward, we'll see how that changes. Today, it still exists, but it's not as more hardcore. People are more gutsy to say, yeah, I made this and I made that. But back then, in the 90s, no one. There was an NDA. The Quorum Watch, for example. We know who made it today, but back then, you couldn't go out and say, you couldn't create a brand, your brand. You couldn't turn your name into a brand. You couldn't create a website and say, hey, by the way, I did this.
Yeah, my list of accomplishments.
Yeah.
Actually, this brings me to an interesting point, because so when you say like it was very difficult for independent watchmakers to get their name out there, to do something different, and then you mentioned Philippe Dufour as well. I think there's a very interesting reasoning for why that happened, right? Because everybody made, round watches, perhaps maybe a tourbillon, perhaps maybe a minute repeater or a chronograph or whatever, right? But and conventional cases, right? So round, tonneau or cushion shaped, square or rectangular. Okay, so what I think independent watchmakers were doing at the time, were doing these like very differently shaped watches or complications that would be presented in a different manner. What comes to mind is Antigua. Yeah, but I don't know if that was in the 90s, right? But like I do remember like Antoine Preziusio's.
Triple tourbillon.
It was called, I think, Snowflake, Shooting Star, or like something like that. So it was like a tourbillon with like lots of diamonds,
there was
very skeletonized.
Aesthetic creativity,
exactly, right? So maybe not like in terms of like I'm gonna create a new complication a la Breva Genie or something, right? Like wind speed accelerometer. I don't even know what.
It's the same like Epigeon when they came out. Aesthetically, they were very different from. Now you could see it, you would think but at that time when he launched in 1999, he was different.
Yeah, it's a small subdial and everything. Yeah. Okay, cool. So another watch that comes to mind is, what was that name? One of the guys from the original AHCI guys, OG. I think it was Thomas Mercer.
Mercer?
Yeah. He made this Mars tourbillon or something. So if you look at it today, it's going to remind you of Jacob & Co.'s Orbit tourbillon. Today I can't remember any names. But yeah, so like it kind of looked like that. And I think these were the watches that I remember reading about like in the early 2000s that came out in the 90s that were like really striking. And for Philippe Dufour to kind of like challenge that and to say, no, I'm going to make a conventional wristwatch. I'm going to make a round case. I'm going to do 3 hands, nothing fancy, perhaps an enamel dial on some of the editions. But I'm going to finish it to a level that no one has ever seen before, that no one is currently doing today. And perhaps maybe that's why he wasn't as out there as some of these other brands, because I remember forum posts about Preziuso, you know, like I remember forum posts about Vianney Halter, you know, like I remember a lot of forum posts about people who were doing something different. Many people who don't exist today, I mean, like have either died themselves or the brand has died off.
But don't forget, those brands at that time, even who are doing something different, they were barely surviving.
No.
Because you could buy anything they had at 50% off.
I saw
minimum.
a video.
They were like living day by day, which was, I mean, you have to give it to them to have the heart and the passion for them to start a brand.
To challenge and keep saying, yeah, I'm doing something different. Just before that, I remember watching a video, okay, on YouTube. I don't know if it's taken down now or not, but like it was basically Basel in the late 90s or maybe early 2000s, okay? And you could see Philippe Dufour and I think Felix from Urwerk and someone else was there with him. I can't remember the third person. And they were talking to the camera and they were saying, yeah, you know, like we're here to challenge the brands, you know, to show that we're doing something different. And you can see like 10 simplicities in the background and like, you know, like everything's available. And like it just goes to show that no one had their eye there and how hard it was for independent brands to come out and to kind of like showcase what they're doing today. You said the lack of ability to share, like with CDs and USBs and like carrying 30 kilograms of like media with you. I mean, what chance does an independent have? You know, like how many CDs is he gonna make? Like he's already like, CDs weren't cheap back then, right? You know, like print media wasn't cheap back then, you know, like to print like 1,000 brochures, like you needed like a proper budget. So I don't want to compare it to today because I don't want to get too ahead of myself of how easy it is today to just like make anything.
Oh, I have a lot to say about today, but we'll hold on.
And don't forget, at that time, there was only Baselworld and SIHH at that time. There was no Geneva Watch Days, there was nothing. So, and SIHH was closed. So it was pretty much only Richemont brands. Yeah. So if you want to exhibit, you need to go to Baselworld. And Baselworld was extremely expensive. I mean, I remember at that time they were milking it with the prices for the stand, for everything. I mean, even for the independent brands, I remember there was a couple of guys that I know. They had a stand there, a very small stand, and they were commuting every day from Geneva all the way to Baselworld because they just wanted to save the money because the hotels and the accommodation in Baselworld were so expensive.
Well, nothing has changed.
As expensive as transport was, it was cheaper to commute to and fro Geneva and Basel back in those days rather than to book a hotel.
I don't know why, like, because this is still a problem in today's shows, but I guess no one has really bothered to say enough is enough. Basel's no longer there, so that's...
I think everybody says enough is enough. It's just that no one does anything about it, right? It's like, what other choice do I have? Like, if I don't exhibit now?
Well, now what some of the independents are... I don't want to go too far ahead, but the solution is to follow the collectors. I'm not sure if I can mention the name of this independent.
You can mention the name and then we'll decide whether we want to cut it or not.
Well, like Romain Gauthier, for example, doesn't exhibit in any of these shows, but he knows all my collectors and their friends that probably have heard about me are going to be in town at that time. I'm going to do my own things to bring people together. So he has dinners, and like that's a very nice approach of doing stuff. I don't have to pay for a booth. Maybe I did at start to get the ball rolling, and now I have at least enough so that have a controlled set of orders and everything. And I think that's something that that's a strategy you can do today that you probably couldn't do back then, because back then there wasn't the support of social media.
Well, that's a little unfair today, okay? Because you just said it, right? Because he already knows enough collectors. He already knows how to get to meet them directly, right? But like going back to
The 90s.
The 90s. I mean, like, you were at Basel and you still didn't know any collectors. You were exhibiting year after year, burning money year after year.
At that time, website, you couldn't download images. You know, now if you go to a website, there's a press area.
Yeah.
At that time, it was not available. So you were so limited, because I still remember 1999, FP Journe opened his first manufacturer. I think it was only the bottom floor. He didn't get the second floor yet. And he had no employees. There was only one lady working with him. There was no one else. Talking to the other media, nobody understood why did the brand start. I mean, he had very beautifully designed watch. The guy is a genius. But even for him, it was a huge risk. People didn't get it.
Okay, let's break down. Okay, so your perspective is more on the marketing side of things. I'm gonna say, let's look at the kind of collector that existed in the 90s. I think that plays a huge role. And one story that kind of comes to mind is when Piaget had their Grand Sonnery, okay? They were supposed to make 10, they delivered 9. And the reason they delivered 9 is not just because the price was absurd, but because honestly, no one really understood what the Grand Sonnery is. And to add on to that is, when they would go and deliver the watch to the said client, they would sit and explain it for an hour. And then at the end of this hour, this client would look at the watch and they would say, well, where's the chronograph? Because the Grand Sonnery had the 2 buttons on the side. That was the kind of collector and the kind of watch education that you had back then. Probably because of marketing, but probably because if I was at that mindset in the 90s going, if I was looking for a Dufour, if I was looking for an independent artisan, first of all, you had the challenge of each one of them has their own specific aesthetic, very, very exclusive, very like unique DNA. I have to find someone that this appeals to. So I'm already niche, but I'm even more so finding someone who's looking for, I need an independent who likes my style. That's, and if he's like hesitant with my style, that's a big no-no, because now I'm asking him to pay X amount of money, which obviously auctions and prices back then were, a Dufour was, a Simplicity in the 2000s was 60,000 Swiss francs, somewhere around there, just short of.
Depending on which configuration. So actually, it's funny you should say that, because up until 2015, he still had the prices on his website.
Yeah.
So I believe the cheapest was rose gold with a brass dial. It was 25, 28 Swiss. And then the most expensive was, I think, the smaller size rose gold.
The smaller size.
And then you had the larger size in platinum with an enamel dial, I think somewhere at 60. But no one paid
60K,
those prices.
60K at that time was a crazy amount of money.
A lot of money. Today, people start off with like steel watches and like subscription. Okay, I don't want to get there. But I want to. Okay, I have to mention this on Philippe Dufour. But first of all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the pathway that he has created for these independents. And the reason I have this respect is not necessarily because I find his watches appealing, personally. I find them quite underwhelming to my taste, because it's a safe approach of there's a 3-hand watch. However, the stuff that he's done to like, you can see everything he's done, and you can see the struggle. And then you can see like the cash at the end, but you can see the struggle, right? And the struggle is, I started off making stuff for Audemars Piguet. And as he says, they had no respect for my work. They didn't handle it with care. I wanted to protect my work and go independent,
obviously being independent at that time was well understood. You were not going to make money. You were not going to retire. He said it several times. Retire is not in your vocabulary. And he started with a pocket watch. Same thing with his name. And then after that, he went and he miniaturized a Grand Sonnery and was the first person to do so into a wristwatch. Insane. Insane to do that back then, right?
With the tools and the
first
you didn't have AutoCAD back then,
no.
right? Like if you did, it wasn't functioning as it did today, right?
Like
this was trial and error. Okay, the gear is this big, like this bridge is that big, that cam is this big. Okay, now I need to shrink everything by 20%. I need to measure everything.
A lot of manual work.
And I will believe when he says it took him 2,000 hours to make one. Today, if someone says 2,000 hours, I will laugh. But back then, when he says 2,000 hours, I will believe it. And then he did the duality. So when we look at the duality in 1996, you have a very classic, uninteresting aesthetic, but you have two escapements. Also inspired by something he's seen, of course. And when he did that, he made 9 pieces. Not because that was like, it obviously was a struggle, but that was the amount of traction your great watch was getting. Nothing. You could barely sell 9 watches. And today we look at it like it's a shame, but back then you have to put yourself in that period. 9 of this tremendous effort. And I think probably when he made the simplicity, he was like, you know what, I don't know why I'm doing so much work for people that don't appreciate it. I'm just gonna go ahead and, just the aesthetics seem to work. No one asked me about the movement. Let's just go simpler. But you can tell he really had to do so much work back then. And that's just Dufour, right? And you can go and you can look at other independents. The creativity was at a level that was, there was a lot on the table. So that was the 90s, at least on my part, from what I see.